session for our TVI Time Spotlight on CVI, and we are focusing today on CVI myths and misconceptions. A reminder of our upcoming dates and times, always at 2:30 to 4. November 21st, we'll talk about setting yourself up with success. December 19th, getting started with CVI. January 30th, building on CVI assessment options and knowledge. February 27th, environmental considerations and presentation of lessons. On March 27th, collaboration and teaming. April 24th, practical applications. And we will have some guest speakers included. So for our November session, Karen Whitaker and Leisha Yamowitz from MCIU will be presenting. For our December and January sessions, Kathy Alstrom from Salis at Drexel will be presenting, and then March and April, Beth Ramella from Overbrook School for the Blind will be presenting. So we're excited to have those speakers moving forward. As we review the following and go forward, we would ask you to consider myths and misconceptions around CVI that you have encountered. How did you communicate those information to others? And are there changes to your professional practice? And we will have time to chat at the end. Although if you would like to unmute while we're going along, please feel free to do that if you don't mind it being recorded or added into the chat. And we will share your comment without sharing your name. So jumping in, our first myth is about CVI terminology. So the myth is there's one accepted term to describe individuals with CVI. And we would say that's not true. There's two accepted terms at this point. There's cortical visual impairment, which is what we all became familiar with, and probably when this condition first came on the awareness of us in the educational visual impairment field, this is the term that was used. Cortical visual impairment, and this is specifically referring to brain damage on the sites in the visual cortex or cortical region. But as medical practitioners were learning more about CVI, they started to notice that students who had that brain damage outside of the visual cortex were also exhibiting and had CVI. So they've also used the term and came up with cerebral because it's a more encompassing term that refers to those areas beyond the visual cortex. What we need to acknowledge is both terms fail to capture the possibility of a more global neurological injury. So we do have a verdict on this myth. Is that the National Eye Institute is currently researching CVI, but no official terminology has been released. It is our understanding that they have a group working on looking at different aspects of CVI, even as far as what how to diagnose it and coming up with that criteria. So it's universal for medical professionals. And we believe they'll be releasing their initial findings in December. So we're excited and look forward to finding out that information.
And Jen, while we're on here, this is a good example of how things can change so quickly. I mean, we are hearing that there will be an update, there will be a release of this publication. So some of these myths and misconceptions can come out in a year, 2 years, tomorrow, we just don't know. So as of October 29th, 2024 at 2:51 p.m., we do know that right now, it is still one of those situations that we are waiting for some additional guidance about some terminology, and we're excited about the future of this publication.
All right, moving on.
So ocular impairment, the myth is CVI is an eye condition that can be corrected with glasses. So oftentimes you have a student with CVI and someone who might not be aware might wonder, is there a way that we can just provide magnification? Can we provide them a new prescription that would solve the problem of CVI? According to the book from Lewick and Dutton, that's Vision in the Brain, CVI refers to disordered vision or visual perception of any type or severity as a result of damage or disorder to the visual pathways or centers of the brain. So when we're thinking CVI, we are thinking that it is visual pathways and centers of the brain instead of being ocular where it's your eyes. So our picture here would be of the eye. So the verdict is CVI is not an ocular impairment. So it's definitely important that we are pointing these out to educational teams so they are aware it's something that isn't ocular in nature. It is going to be our visual pathways in those centers of the brain.
Right, moving on. Neuroplasticity. Like an ocular impairment, CVI is permanent and will not improve over time. That is the myth we want to talk about next. And this just is not true. The growing body of research, as well as advances in brain imaging technology, is leading to a deeper understanding of neuroplasticity, especially when it applies to educating individuals with CVI. So what we know at this point is our brains at any age, we have neuroplasticity, but when we're really young, the younger we are, the more neuroplastic our brains are. So we want to get in there. We want to start working with our students to start determining and putting in interventions to help to see if that neuroplasticity makes those connections to improve their vision. So it is possible with CVI, with the neuroplasticity of the brain for vision to improve, which of course we all know does not happen with our ocular conditions. So the verdict for this myth is the brain has the ability to recognize itself and form new neural connections throughout life. So it is possible that CVI can improve with time.
So the myth for CVI characteristics and behaviors would be that CVI is always represented with all of the following characteristics or behaviors. And those that are familiar with CVI will already know that CVI may show that there's color preference, need for movement, the visual latency, that there's a delay with the students being able to see and attend. We have visual field preferences where objects and preferred materials need to be presented. We spoke earlier too about visual complexity. So visual complexity, need for light, distance viewing, need for light, distance viewing, atypical visual reflexes, visual novelty, and the absence of a guided reach. All of those characteristics, well, let's do the verdict and then I'll continue. Verdict. The verdict is that CVI is not a one-size-fits-all condition and will manifest differently among each individual. So it does require a more personalized approach. And it's just really one of those things that people sometimes see the list of all the behaviors and think, well, then this student, this child, this individual is going to show all these behaviors, all these characteristics that student's going to have. And there's going to be cases where some do represent themselves and manifest, and there's going to be certain ones where they don't, and the student doesn't have an issue there. And that's really going back to assessment, where we're making sure that, yes, this is an area of need versus no, this is not an area of need. They don't need support here. This is not an area or characteristic that they struggle with. And I've seen that plenty of times with color preference. Some students have very strong color preferences, and then certain students, they don't need that. They'll tend fine, and we see that especially with our students and who might be reading and have CVI, but it might not be so pronounced and prominent.
Our next myth is about CVI and autism and that they always coexist. So while CVI and autism can coexist, they are two distinct conditions and both present in similar behaviors, such as visual processing, social interactions, recognizing faces. So it can lead to a misdiagnosis or a delayed diagnosis. So we have the two definitions here on the screen for those who are driving and cannot see it. CVI is a visual impairment caused by damage to the brain's visual pathways. Autism is a neurodevelopment disorder characterized by challenges in social communication and repetitive behaviors. So I think it's important for us to realize when a student, if you're working with a student or you know of a student and looking at possible that misdiagnosis or they're being diagnosed for autism, we also want to look at their history or encourage looking at their brain history to see, do they have brain damage, and ruling out whether CVI is there and vice versa, or whether both are present. So our verdict is, well, I didn't do my sound. To understand those differences, similarities, and professionals who can better diagnose and support individuals with either or both conditions. And also we need to educate and start those lines of communication with our colleagues who work in autism so they understand those differences and similarities as well.
One thing I want to add to here, Jen, as we were developing this slide, one thing that stood out to me was if a student is diagnosed with both of these and it's assumed that they are hand in hand, I think sometimes that can cause the wrong interventions and the wrong supports. And there was a story of a student where they were identified with having CVI supports and they didn't have CVI, and vice versa. And part of that is something to consider, that we need to be making sure that we get the latest reports, that there is that assessment piece from the professionals who are able to make the determinations on, does the student have CVI, does the student have autism? Those diagnoses are really important when we're talking about making such a really important decision in the educational process. So I found this to be very fascinating and interesting topic.
It is, and it's a newly emerging one, right? That there's not a lot out there on it. But I'm sure we're going to see more on this topic as it occurs. So please have this on your radar. All right, I believe the next one is yours, Greg.
Yes. So the myth is that students with CVI cannot receive the free and appropriate public education, or FAPE, in the general education setting. And we know that, maybe I shouldn't reveal the verdict just yet. We know that we need to be conducting our rigorous and thorough assessments. And we also know that students deserve the right to be educated in their least restrictive environment. We should not assume that they need to be placed in a separate setting other than the general education setting. And for that, we need to make sure that, yes, we are collaborating as a team to ensuring that the student is placed in the correct location. And if the general education is the least restrictive environment, then most certainly, verdict.
Verdict.
With appropriate assessment and educational planning and specialized supports, students with CVI most certainly can receive FAPE in the general education setting. Of course, that verdict doesn't mean all students will be taught in the general education setting. That is determined by an educational team. They are the ones that need to determine the appropriate placement for students. And yes, a student with CVI can receive FAPE in the general education setting if determined by their team. And I'll pass it back to you, Jen.
Moving on, our next one is about it takes a whole team. The myth is supports for students with CVI can only occur when the TVI is present. This just is not the case. Yes, they definitely occur when the TVI is present, but they often need to involve a team approach, right? So when we were talking earlier in our discussion, those things about modeling to the team, sharing a portfolio so they understand how that vision impacts them. Those are all great ways to be working with the team. The TVI is going to provide that guidance and training, that modeling to those professionals in education on the visual impact and the instructional strategies that need to occur. So we would strongly advocate working as a team, collaboratively teaming when possible. One of the suggestions earlier came up about having weekly team meetings, and maybe you can't have them weekly, but if you can have them bi-weekly or monthly, that would really be a way to approach it as a team as well. So our verdict here is CVI can receive consistent and effective support regardless of whether the TVI is physically present. But we also know that as a TVI, and with team communication, we need for that communication to be intentional. So interventions should not be random. We know that we should know why we are doing the intervention. The team needs to know why and the purpose and the function. Interventions in the communication also needs to be purposeful. So what is the rationale for why we are doing this as a team, why the student needs this, and always trying to have a purpose to an end goal and making it functional as well, that communication to the student as well as to the team. Thinking about using the vision in ongoing activities, how can the student incorporate using their vision or their accommodations in the other activities that other professionals are doing, whether working with them directly or within the classroom structure, and not just during our isolated vision lessons. It should have a functional purpose. And also,
So
I was just going to say, also as a TVI, we want you to help design instructional activities, model those visual impairment strategies, and then monitor, revise, and expand on those activities as needed. Right, you were going to add.
you took the words right out of my mouth, so we're good.
All right, so then we are going to move on, and this one is yours, Greg.
Thanks. So how about the myth that CVI only impacts a small percentage of students? You may have, if you've been in the field for a while, have noticed that the identification and the diagnosis of students with CVI has seemingly just what we're seeing in the field has seemed to increase significantly and has gone up. So on this slide, we did represent a graph of a bar chart gradually working its way up to some of the highest numbers. And that is something that is a trend, but we're finding through research that CVI is not something that's a small percentage of our students, that it actually would be predominant in youth and in children in the United States, especially, that they're getting diagnosed with CVI. So it is one of those more common visual impairments that appear throughout our country, and one that early intervention and supports at an early age are critical to ensuring that students don't come with any missed opportunities when they enter school age programming. The earlier we work with students and identify that, yes, the student does have a visual impairment, the more equipped the team is to support them at those earlier ages and prepare them for school age demands as well as secondary transition, which is so critical. So the verdict for the CVI only impacts a small percentage of students is according to the NEI in 2024, CVI is the leading cause of vision loss amongst kids. And I will just state as well that in the United States, this can vary depending on countries, but the United States is identifying more and more students with CVI as our medical professionals become more equipped and better prepared, and research is growing to show that we have a significant number of students with CVI across the United States. And back to you, Jen.
Okay, let's talk about CVI assessment. So there's a myth out there that you can insert any name of any CVI assessment here and say it is the only tool designed to assess students with CVI. And that's not true. There are multiple tools out there now that have been developed. We have them listed on our website, which we'll be going through in a little bit. So there are those multiple assessment tools developed by various leaders and experts in the field. Each tool has subtle differences depending on the individual's learning needs of the student, but it is commonly accepted. The core aspects of CVI are commonly accepted across research experts. So you might have different terminology that's used, going back to that terminology slide we had before. They might call some of those core aspects of CVI, might have them, give them different names, but they are all the assessments are looking at the same things. They just might slightly label it differently. Those are those subtle differences. So our verdict here is assessment tools will vary depending on learners and purpose for evaluation. So a couple of those assessment options that we have is the CVI protocol that just came out. I think it's been out less than a month. We're gonna talk a little bit about that later. There is the CVI companion guide from APH. And if you go into their appendix B, you'll find a CVI profile. There's the sensory balance book created by Dr. Christine Roman-Lancey and Matt Tejan. That's really focusing on LMAs for students with CVI. We have the cerebral visual impairments in persons with profound intellectual disabilities, sometimes referred to as the CVI PIMD. That comes out of the Netherlands, and that's a really nice assessment as well. The Netherlands really has paid a lot of attention and devoted a lot of time to CVI, so we have a lot of great resources coming out from there. There's also, we know with our assessments, we can always tweak something and make sure that we're bringing in the lens of CVI. So in the book, Vision in the Brain, Understanding Cerebral Visual Impairment in Children, if you look at chapters 10 through 18, they all focus on assessment. So the functional vision assessment, they have a chapter on orientation mobility, a chapter on AT assessment. So it really jumps into different areas of assessment for students with CVI that you can look at to help in your practice. We have Dr. Gordon Dutton's Visual Skills Inventory, which is a questionnaire to do with educational team and families. And that is the most widely used question inventory used in the world. So that is also an option for you. And then of course, we also have Dr. Roman-Lancey's the CVI range. We have to applaud Dr. Ramsey for bringing CVI to attention in our field. And for creating, this was the first assessment ever created for CVI. So it's an oldie but a goodie.
One of the things I like about this slide, Jen, is we have a picture of a variety of hammers that are used for all different purposes. And my question to everyone in this meeting is, which one of these hammers, and I'll describe them in a little bit, but for those who can see, which one of these hammers would you rather have a doctor use to check your reflex in your knees? Do you remember that test where you have the hammer and it tests your reflex of your legs and your knees? Out of all the hammers, which one do you see that looks good? And I will let you know, there are axes, there are mallets, there are meat hammers. I see ice picks, and I also see the one that we typically see at a doctor's office, which is that small hammer with a triangle, and it's red and it's a little soft. It's not the best feeling in the world, but I'd rather have that than any of the other hammers on here. But it just goes to show you how there can be a lot of a type of tool, but there's a lot of varieties for different purposes and uses. And I think that goes to illustrate real nicely the importance of ensuring that the assessment tools we use are appropriate for our students, and that an understanding too that they might have different purposes. So we need to ensure we're finding those perfect fits for assessment tools for our individual students and their individual needs. And that goes in real nicely to the next slide that talks about functional vision assessment. And there is a myth out there that a CVI evaluation can replace a functional vision assessment. And as that last slide alluded to very nicely, no assessment is made equal. All assessments are made by different leaders, experts, and researchers in the field. And thus, we need to ensure that we are collecting all the necessary information that is required as part of a functional vision assessment. Because while a CVI assessment is going to focus primarily on the aspects of CVI, we still need information as teachers for the visually impaired still need information to share with the team about the ocular condition of the eyes. It is possible that you could have a student that has CVI and a coexisting visual impairment. That is possible. And in those situations, you would need a very thorough and good CVI evaluation and a functional vision evaluation. And if there's a student that does not have an ocular impairment, but has CVI, we still need to have both. So it is important to ensure that we are still collecting all of the information from a CVI evaluation and a functional vision assessment as part of our essential assessments. So the verdict is a functional vision assessment is required and cannot be replaced by a CVI evaluation. That said, a functional vision assessment can be supported and enhanced by a thorough CVI evaluation. So the importance is we still need to be ensuring that a functional vision assessment is occurring and taking place. And that just helps make sure that there's no underlying ocular impairments, but also ensuring that, yes, a teacher for the visually impaired is completing all the essential assessments that is part of their professional responsibilities.
That has us going to our next myth, which is TVI qualifications in Pennsylvania. So there is a myth out there that teachers of students with visual impairments are not qualified to assess, teach, and/or support students with CVI. We wanted to ensure you that our TVIs here in Pennsylvania do receive specialized training to assess and support our students with various types of visual impairments, including CVI. They're trained to understand the unique needs of these students and to implement appropriate strategies. We have reached out to each of the 3 universities in Pennsylvania, and they have assured us that they embed CVI content in all of their courses, their current courses that they have. This might not have been the case 10 years ago, but it's absolutely the case now, as since we have discussed, it is the leading cause of visual impairment in the United States. We also know that our PA programs also base all of their teaching on the core standards of CEC's Division of Visual Impairment and Deafblindness, which are the knowledge and skills for initial special education serving students with visual impairments. So that is also one of the things that they do. So we just want to point out in Pennsylvania, we do have high qualification standards compared to some other states, not all other states, but some other states, in the sense that to become a TVI in Pennsylvania, you must graduate from a college or university with a TVI degree, whether that's a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or a certificate from that university. Then you have to have like a practicum and a teaching experience as well as a teacher of the visually impaired, which is so many hours within the classroom or working with students if you're perhaps doing your student teaching as an itinerant. Then you have to pass the praxis exam, and there are certain classes that you have to take in your program as well. And all of that comes forward before you can get your PA certification. You'll get your level 1 certification, which you all are familiar with if you are a TVI in the state of Pennsylvania. And then you have 3 years to, or is it 6 years to move forward to get your level 2 certification, 25 additional hours of master's level coursework. It's important to know what the qualifications in Pennsylvania are, because there are some states that do not have those prerequisites. So for example, there's a state, I won't mention which one, but where you can just take the test. And if you take that test, you're considered a TVI. You don't have to have a degree from a university to be able to be eligible to take that test. There's also some states that only require a certain number, a small percentage, a small number of classes in visual impairment to then be considered a TVI. So one of the other reasons it's important to know these qualifications is because we are in a world where we're very connected now. And as you know, you're probably on Facebook or other types of communities. You might be on Instagram or X, formerly known as Twitter, where you're connecting with people from other states. And there might be this myth might be being put out by someone from that state, and it might be true in that state. But here in Pennsylvania, our teachers are qualified to work with any student with any type of visual impairments, and that includes CVI. Of course, if anyone feels we can't teach everything to the degree that we might for a student with a visual impairment, any type of visual impairment. So there might be areas, especially with CVI, as the medical community is learning more about it, and we're learning more about it on how to best approach it, provide those assessments, those strategies. You're probably going to need additional training, right? Because this is an emerging area that is continuing to change with the brain as we understand it. So you will need additional training in these areas as we learn more. But according to Pennsylvania's Department of Education, if you have a TVI certification level 1 or 2, you are qualified to work with any student with visual impairment, including students with CVI. CVI plays a crucial role in the education of students with CVI, ensuring they receive the supports they need to succeed. So yes, our CVIs are qualified. Moving on, Greg.
Thanks. So sometimes the myth that we hear is that CVI only impacts students with profound complex needs. And sometimes we also hear the myth that CVI only impacts students of a certain age. Sometimes we hear the myth that CVI only impacts students and you can insert whatever component that you would like in there, but we sometimes hear that only impacts these students and that CVI represents in these patterns. And the truth is that it really can show in most any student in a variety of different levels. And there's no age that you could or can't have CVI. There's no type of disability that could increase or decrease CVI. You can see it in a wide range of students. And because of that, we do have this graphic that does a real good job of explaining how children not only with profound vision loss and additional disabilities can have CVI, but we can also have students, children, and individuals who are functionally using their vision and working at near or expected academic level for their age groups. And when we have those situations, we really have to be detectives and considering how is CVI impacting this student, this child, this individual's daily work? Is there anything that's impacting their educational access? And in the thorough assessments that we do and conduct, we can help figure out what is really the cause. And from that, we can determine, yes, from what the medical record says and from how the student's performing in the educational setting, we are noticing that, yes, the student does demonstrate some signs of having trouble reading, staying attentive. They're showing fatigue. So all of that to say, the verdict is that CVI impacts students at all levels and all ages, and we can't just think that this is going to be occurring for our students with the most complex needs. We will have students that may have CVI who, again, perform at a wide array of different levels. And in those situations, we need to make sure that we are ensuring that they are receiving the accommodations, the supports, and more importantly, that the team is receiving the supports and understanding because CVI is still something that we're learning about. There's more research being published and released daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and we need to make sure that we are educating our teams as the field evolves and as we learn more information about supporting students, children, individuals with CVI. So those are all of our myths and verdicts. I am going to pass it over to Jen so she can share a few things that you should be keeping on your radar.
Yes, we are going to have, when we stop the recording at the end, we'll have about 20 minutes to continue our discussion. So if there's any myths or misconceptions that we did not address, just jot them down right now and we will talk about those at the end. So a few things we want to keep on your radar, make you aware of. Our patent website has recently had a major overhaul. So we want to make you aware of that. We do have a page on CVI that we have added a lot of information to. On that page, we also have a resource section under the areas. These are the topic areas under those resources, CVI assessment resources. So there'll be a list there. websites on CVI, CVI books and publications, patent trainings on CVI, which we're hoping to add more in the future, e-learning opportunities on CVI, and position papers that have been created around CVI. So let's do a little walkthrough. So here is our patent website. I'm going to take us to the homepage. So here on about a third of the way down, we have a green toolbar going across, and I'm stopping at evidence-based practices. I'm clicking the arrow next to that, and I'm going down the list to blind visual impairment, which, just as a side note, we have a consistent name across the website now, which wasn't always the case. It was either blind, visual impairment, blind. So it's now blind visual impairment when you're searching for us. So in training plans, in the training calendar, in our publications. So I'm going to blind visual impairment directly. You could hit the arrow next to it as well if you know exactly where you want to go. Here's the list of our pages. On the top row, on the far right, we have CVI, a brain-based visual impairment. I'm clicking on that. And here is the information that you have. We start out with a sentence talking about CVI as a brain-based visual impairment that is due to the injury of the brain. Students with CVI can also have eye-based conditions and or eye motor disorders that exist alongside CVI. Then we talk a little bit about how vision can get better over time, sometimes for students with CVI, but not always. How it's important to have interventions that are implemented and supported by a student with visual impairments in collaboration with the rest of the team. I'm not picking up all the information here, but just highlighting a few of the key points. In our next paragraph, we talk about how the National Institute of Health is currently focusing on CVI. And as of yet, though, there is no common standard language used. Therefore, some assessments and information might refer to CVI visual behaviors, CVI characteristics of CVI, or others yet to manifestations of CVI. And that although different terminology is used, the same common visual aspects of CVI are addressed by all. We then go on in our next paragraph to talk about how students with CVI have unique learning needs that differ in complexity from students with eye-based visual impairments, that students who've either been diagnosed by a medical professional or are suspected of having CVI be addressed by a TVI with a functional vision assessment that includes testing in the areas of CVI as part of that educational evaluation process. And then for this section, the last paragraph goes over, it introduces you to a resource that we'll actually be looking at next called Cortical Cerebral Visual Impairment. And this document was developed by the Pennsylvania Advisory Committee on Educating Students Who are Blind or Visually Impaired. And they advise the Pennsylvania Departments of Education, Bureau of Special Education on all matters related to educating students with visual impairment across the Commonwealth. So this is a document they created at CVI. The next section we have on this page is examples of different CVI terminology. So we have three different assessments or assessments that we picked. What is the terminology they use? So we have in the box here, we have CVI visual behaviors. That is from Perkins, from their CVI protocol developed here in 2024. We have the 16 areas that they say are visual behaviors. We have Dr. Roman's CVI characteristics, last updated in 2018. We have her 10 visual characteristics. And then we also have manifestations of CVI, which are Lewick and Chen and Hartman's manifestations identified in 2021, and we have their 16 manifestations.
And one of the things, the reasons why we cover all three, just so everyone knows, is all of them have very unique, this is a great example of the different terminology, the differences. There's similarities and differences, but neither is wrong, neither is incorrect. They all bring a different twist to some of the terminology, whether that's visual behaviors, characteristics, or manifestations. So if you have a colleague or someone else that you know that's using a different one, that is totally fine. And we wanted to make sure that we were highlighting all the different ways people might be using these different terminologies to describe some of what's happening to our students due to CVI. So This is a nice example of how some of it will connect and interconnect with one another, but then there's also going to be some that go a little bit deeper and provide a different twist or perspective to it. And that's okay too. That's fine.
And if you look at these, you'll notice like number 5, impact of color. In CVI characteristics, it's number 2. In CVI characteristics of visual field preferences is visual field abilities, and number 4 in CVI visual behaviors. And again, looking for the color is number 10 in manifestations, and the fields are here as well. They obviously fields impact depth perception, but as well. So you'll see the core as you compare them, you'll see how they connect, right? Not using the same terminology, but they're looking at the same things. So our last section here are those resources I mentioned. So these are drop downs. So if you click the arrow next to the topic, you will get a bulleted list with links that take you out to those outside resources. So all the CVI assessments I mentioned earlier, we have connected here. In our first bullet though is getting started with CVI assessments. It's a nice article from Perkins. We have our websites on CVI. We have American Foundation's Cortical Cerebral Visual Impairment website. We have CVI Scotland, which Scotland spends a lot of time on CVI as well. So a lot of great things come out of Scotland in this website. We have Paths to Literacy, CVI and Literacy. We have Perkins, CVI Now. We have Roman CVI Resources, which I just noticed with that update, that link is incorrect, but we will get that changed very quickly. But if you Google Dr. Roman CVI Resources, the website should come up. And then the other website we have here are Strategies to See, which has a lot of nice resources as well. She also has a book that we have listed in this section. So we have, I believe we have 6 books listed under our books and publications. So we have our patent publication considerations for educating students with CVI in the learning environment. We have Strategies to See from Diane Sheelan listed here. We have Cortical Visual Impairments, Advanced Principles by Dr. Roman. We have Vision in the Brain by Lewick and Dutton. We have Cortical Visual Impairment, An Approach to Assessment Interventions, the 2nd edition by Dr. Roman, and the CVI Guide to the Development Guidelines for Infants and Visual Impairments by Lewick, Chen, and Hartman. And I'm noticing now we don't have the sensory balance one, but we will add that one as well.
That's actually, Jen, that's a good way of saying too. This is just setting the stage. We've added a lot more to this site, and Jennifer said that at the beginning, that this is something we've had in the past, but this is a lot more information than we've ever had on this page, and we plan on continuing to build upon it too. So if there's anything as you're watching and you're seeing that we might be missing, understand that it's not purposeful. Feel free to reach out to us and we can certainly add that. There are plenty that we know that can be referenced and featured here, and we were just certainly just trying to set that beginning process of getting this website off the ground. And yeah, we love feedback, so feel free to reach out to us, let us know if there's anything we can add in addition.
Or if it's incorrect, like I mentioned, one of the links I've noticed just before this meeting was incorrect. If you notice that across the website, with any update, things need a little TLC. So if you become aware of something, please let us know so that we can get it changed. We have patent trainings on CVI. So we will spotlight our CVI series in this section once it's over. We have our CVI identification and assessment intervention, which was done in 2020, an 8-part series. And then CVI spring training basics on CVI, which was done by Beth Ramella in 2016. We highlight some e-learning opportunities we're aware of by Perkins and APH Hive. And you would just want to use that filter function, CVI, or you can use the tag function of cerebral visual impairment. And then our 2 position papers, we have PACES BVI, our advisory committee here in Pennsylvania's document, which we're looking at next, and a position paper from our professional organization for educators, AER, on the roles and responsibilities of vision educators when learners have CVI, which was created in 2020. So those are a few of the resources. And as Greg said, we're looking to have this be continuously updated. So if you're aware of something that you think would be a great resource to add there, please let us know. So we want to jump into the cerebral visual impairment document created from PACES and do a little walkthrough with you. So I do have it listed here. Apologies, just let me make my screen a little bigger and move a couple of things around. So we have a little introduction here on this document. Hold on, I need to change my share. Can you see it, Fred?
Yeah, I see it perfectly.
So this document was originally created in 2019 and it has been updated in last summer of 2023. The advisory committee is also looking at this as a live document and updating it as new things emerge with CVI, our understanding and best practices. So we have a table of contents, and in our table of contents, all of these areas are hyperlinked. So I can click specifically on that area and it'll take me directly to that section of the document. So we have, what is CVI? Is CVI a visual impairment? How is CVI diagnosed? What is the educational referral and evaluation process? Who is qualified to evaluate and provide services for children with CVI, with some sub areas of PA certified teachers for students with visual impairments, how to become certified as a TVI in Pennsylvania, preparation programs for students with TVI in for preparation program standards and guidance for teachers of students with visual impairments in Pennsylvania, and how to maintain your certification. The last few areas that we have are what assessment tools are used by a program for students with visual impairments to address and refer service provision, which they talk about the FEA, the LMA, the ECC curriculum assessment, and if there are specific CVI assessment tools. And then the last section is the evaluation process for service providers for students with visual impairments who may have CVI. What does it look like? And then references and resources.
They seem to answer a lot of those questions, those myths and misconceptions that we reviewed today as well, which is kind of a nice connection of what we discussed today.
Yes, absolutely. We would suggest that you bookmark this page. Don't bookmark this exact page. Bookmark the CVI page and bring it up, because when this is next updated, you'll find the latest version when you click the hyperlink here. If you star this page where you see the actual document up in an Adobe Reader, that will always be the only version that you have access to. So always click on it from the CVI page on our patent website. We would suggest that you become familiar with it so that you're able to answer questions of your special ed directors, maybe even your supervisor, of family members and parents. We would suggest that you pass it out to your special ed directors and your school partners so they're familiar with it. And let them know that CVI is an area where we're going to have a lot of students. If they don't have them now, they will get a student probably eventually with CVI. So they really should become familiar with this document so that they can appropriately answer parents' questions as well. Is there an area that anyone would like to explore? Would someone like to put into the chat or unmute and be like, hey, I want to look at this section. Could someone pick a section for us?
This is Becca.
Hi, Becca.
Hello. Does it say anything about the window of opportunity? I know that that's something that we've talked about in my undergrad, and just that window of opportunity for providing supports for students.
I don't think it gets into that specific question, Becca. It talks about how CVI is diagnosed in the educational referral evaluation process, but I think they're talking more about, because a student can be diagnosed at any age. I don't think that they went into that aspect, but that is a good thing to take back.
Yeah, so wouldn't that be a myth then? Because like you said, it can be diagnosed at any time and students can receive interventions at any time. So wouldn't that be a myth?
Well, there is with neuroplasticity, we would say that the earlier they can get diagnosed with CVI and get those interventions, the more likely the neuroplasticity of the brain is going to make those connections it needs to. And hopefully we would see vision get better, but of course that's not guaranteed. But the younger you are, we know the more neuroplastic the brain is. So with any intervention, not even CVI, it could be a literacy intervention or any intervention for any student. The younger you are, the better it is. That's why the first 5 years of life are so crucial.
And to kind of go into this PACE's document, the purpose and the audience, it might be stuff you are already aware of if you're currently in the field and you're very knowledgeable about CVI. But think of all of those professionals who has not had a student with CVI and needs to learn a lot of the basics to get up and going. This is a wonderful kickstart into making sure that you are comfortable in understanding the basics, understanding without having to dive too much into some of the larger textbooks. This is very quick. It's 10 pages, and it does answer a lot of the common questions you may be expected to answer when, let's say, a new teacher has a student in their classroom that has CVI. This is a really great start to learning a little bit more about how can I best support this student, this child, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already here, which makes hopefully your life a little bit easier in supporting the educational team that the student may be a part of.
Absolutely. So we're going to move on from this document. The last thing that we wanted to share with you after our CVI website in this document is the Perkins CVI protocol. This is a new assessment, as I already stated. It is designed specifically for TVIs. It is robust, individualized evaluation tool. This is all straight from the Perkins website. We would suggest that you sign up for access to the workbooks. What will happen is you'll sign up. They will send you a zip drive with 2 workbooks that you need. And then when you sign up for it, I would also highly suggest you sign up. They prompt you to say, would you like access to our training course? So I would suggest that you do that so you can get training on the course. So here is the page. We're going to put it in the link already done. Great. Thank you, Tim. So the Perkins CVI protocol is free, downloadable, customizable, and grounded in science. You click on get the protocol, you'll fill out your first, last name, email, your role. If it doesn't fit you exactly, put in the best related one. It'll ask you some other questions. And then are you interested? This is where you want to click, yes, I'm interested in the CVI course. And you'll click there, agree to terms, and then you'll get an email pretty quickly in response to that. And then what will happen with the training course email will come separately from the 2 workbooks. So look for that. I didn't notice it right away, but I did get a reminder email a week or 2 later saying, hey, we noticed you haven't signed into this course yet. So do keep an eye out for that. And what the course looks like, it's through Perkins Academy. I think you have free access to it for just over 100 days. And then it is an asynchronous course with different modules that they have listed here. As you can see, I see modules, introduction to the protocol, parent guardian team interviews, observation direct assessments, final report recommendations, planning for after assessments, and additional resources. So we encourage you guys definitely sign up for that course so you can get tested on this latest assessment for CVI that looks at the whole child. So those are the 3 things that we wanted you to keep on your radar for CVI. Of course, we'll be talking about more as we go along over the coming months. But right now, we're going to stop our recording and